Prologue. An Age of Heresy. Mangled were the three sources of enmity that were delivered to the feet of the head Hyperphant, chiefest of all zealots. Three corpses, whose yellow habits were scorched, skin blackened and shriveled like gourds left under a desert sun. Three servants, whose invaluable secrets would never find the ears of their masters again. Three betrayals that were brazenly committed in ribs of the holy city, whose very walls bled piously for the unyielding host. And three confirmations that the hour of vengeance was upon them. A grand pity their sacrifice will not even deliver them to the garden eternal, murmured the head Hyperphant without a shred of empathy. He paced the dais where the corpses interrupted the seamless, gilded interior of the Temple of Perilith. Gold and orange ambiance filled the high temple, unmarred and unblemished by the filth of man, even as the sterilized silk slippers graced the brass platform. "Have you no fear?" rippled his subordinate, prostrated under the great visage that matched his own face, wedge-shaped with leering slits. "Should I worry myself that our host should suffer defeat? Faith is clad to me as my skin," lashed back the Hyperphant. "Oh, it is, undoubtedly, most opulent steward." Normally, desecrating the temple by bringing the dead would merit boiling at the depths or such other tortuous punishment. However, there was an exception. Dire circumstances demanded expedience. The killer had escaped. "Do we know the method how he deceived them? This uncharitable thief who has slain dozens of our comrades?" "Head Hyperphant, he the false prophet. With a wicked tongue, no doubt, he convinced them to be bait for his machinations." The head Hyperphant allowed a slight snort. Seduction alone had not desecrated their corpses, as they were paper to a nail. No, the temple vaults were guarded with ancient weapons that did not discriminate to defend the underchambers of Perilith. Secretly, the head Hyperphant possessed a morbid curiosity to see what the razor beams, boiling serpents, and shifting platforms would deal unto the flesh, even if it were the innocent who acted as test subjects. Clearly, this false prophet could not be underestimated. He'd convinced the three priests to act as canaries for each of the black enchantments, so he might learn their fatal mistakes. It disturbed the Hyperphant that the thief had been integrated among their ranks for so long. Disturbed, but the sentiment did not bring effulsion. "And no others were present to witness this blasphemy, the theft?" "None, opulent steward," answered the lesser, inclining his head further to the effigy of their god. The priest continued, "And the amulet, it has not been recovered nor seen. The vaults are darkened now. A black absence of light reigns now, deviating from glory." "Of course," hissed the Hyperphant behind his metallic visage. "Of course it does. For those of you and your retinue hid in your turrets, fearing the wrath of our host, while the thief walks free, your true nature has been revealed as cowards. Reconciliation is your only salvation now." Shrinking back, the priest whispered, "What is to be done?" The Hyperphant drifted around the corpses as he might a flower bed, circling the dais over and over, musing silently, controlling the scene. "We have grown too comfortable in our corner of the world, too unwilling to fulfill his will, to reclaim the world. This false prophet who crawled beneath our awareness is not a test. but a symbol of our path to immortal glory. He shattered the old covenants, yet new ones will be reforged for our journey into the promised beyond, to the garden eternal. It must transpire without the affectations of mortal transgression. Even as our host is crippled by the false prophet's slight, our quest to recover the sacred cartouche will mark our host's return to the world. Pausing. Heresy will make the earth bleed before it is wholly converted. Yes, quipped the other quietly. It was the kind of rhetoric only a zealot could savor, cruelly animated by shadows that clouded the angular carving of the golden god's serpentine face. The unyielding host responded to the proclamation silently from below the grate, watching the dais like a worm entrenched in the depths, always spying upon his faithful, a god who watched and waited for his subjects to stumble. "Summon the clavigers," suddenly croaked the head Hierophant. "All of them?" The lesser priest's voice quivered. "All who hold the sacred keys to Perilith. Only they can be trusted to recover our host's most prized relic. Envoys will be sent. Flee back to your tower and deliver my missive. The covenant of oration is dissolved immediately. A new one shall be instilled by order of the unyielding host, gilded sovereign of the underworld, and Nanak prince. Now is the time for the covenant of retribution." Audible was the dry swallow. Under his mask, the Hierophant smiled wicked. "The chimes will be sounded thus, opulent steward. Go and see it done." Timid but without hesitation, the lesser priest made the hidden gesture of loyalty, bowing until the forehead kissed the brass steps, eager to leave. But the signal for acceptance was given by the Hierophant, so the priest kept bent in agony. "Those who embrace this reckoning will be rewarded." Beckoning for the other to rise, the Hierophant hissed, "Those who do not will suffer eternal punishment." "Devotion bleeds from us all," came the mantra back. The Hierophant did not glance at the departing priest. Soon the wretch and the rest of his order would be liquefied in the bones of Perilith, a fitting end for the inept caste who profaned the temple with their games of politics, striving for purpose beyond the divine. He had no intention of forgiving the conspiratorial covenant. The cowards. So below, so weak-willed, he hissed into the silence. How they have lost vision. Thousands of years that Perilith had procreated in a world that favored no empire. The priest stood on the shoulders of mortals who had no other impulse but to see the unyielding host as the master of all dominions, their sacrifice entombed in the walls. And still the priests sought to squabble. Pathetic. Never had such blasphemy struck so deep into the heart of the righteous, not even in the annals of the temple's history. It was not unbelievable that the priestly caste wished not to engage any longer. They were ashamed of how the false prophet had gained so much clout among them. The honey dripping from the tongue of this outsider was potent enough that it had emboldened them, even as much to conspire against the head Hierophant openly. The priests risked life over limb by plumbing the sacred vaults, tortured by the ancient spirits, even dying, just so the false prophet could steal their most beloved icon. It beggared on sheer madness, this alliance between traitors and the infiltrator. He almost respected their dedication to backstab him, But the aspect of this false prophet drove the head Hierophant to consider other gods were at play. Indeed, our host is a rival to many. Not a question of if, but whom. And why do they move now? Devoid of the cartouche, the covenants protecting Perilith were rendered null. All the mortal temple-born felt the glow from their host's touch drained and spent, leaving them hollow to the divine connection. Even the head Hierophant could not deny that the false prophet stealing their sacred icon unleashed a quake of chaos that would build until Perilith was ground to dust by rebellion. It disturbed the very nature of the city's omniscience. Generations of effort had been annihilated. Enchantments soured and vanished. Laments of suicide were heard ringing throughout the maze of Perilith, day and night. When one flayed open the body of a god and carried off their organs as a prize, none should expect the consequences to amount to anything less than savage bedlam. They had yet to feel the host's murderous wrath yet. After all, the false prophet had not merely plucked a bauble to peddle to any proprietor. He'd ripped the very heart from the temple, out of its ribs, the cartouche. Without it, life could not preserve the holy city. And yet, no other act other than prying open the vaults of their sacred god and stealing their greatest weakness would motivate the masses in such grand ways. For the cartouche made them inert, comfortable, and above all, rigid in their ways, unable to fulfill those covenants. A great irony. Without any pain, a beast could not be instructed to follow the holder of the needle. Had the Hierophant stopped this blasphemy, there would be no revolt. And so, this whole ordeal worked in his and his master's favor. Crusades only begin by the spark of righteous indignation, came the adage. Perilith was long overdue for a reckoning. With a final nudging the blackened corpses with a padded foot, the Hierophant chuckled. Oh, but my kin, you had to serve such a purpose. How could this journey ever transpire without your unwilling sacrifice? Such a trifle. Only 3 dead to bring about a glorious new age. The Hierophant would have gladly condemned 1,000 for such a bargain. Hideous dusk eclipsed the cloying season of gore. A child wailed over the corpse of its caretaker, smeared in folly. Flies drowned the dark belly of Perilith in festering curtains. Something sinister slithered betwixt the sheer dregs of the curtained walls of steel, honing on the wails of the desperate. Cold-blooded panic uprooted the child, nowhere to run but towards eventual death. What abominable horrors that dwelled in rusted catacombs of the necropolythic temple city were free to feed upon the fearing. Bereft of the 3-faceted cartouche, the bioluminescence protections were gone, and no priest dared to step foot outside their protected towers. The cravens, neglecting their duties, and most importantly, the Hyperphant. To the skies and earth, the mortal wretches made vigilant prayers to the unyielding host, begging for deliverance. In vain. Their god and master relished their suffering. An era of sadism and horror left Perilith billeted with the rotting dead. The darkened streets were impassable between the scavengers and the scavenged. The stench was paralyzing. When it seemed grim and undeniable that the entire city would be consumed by its own cannibalisms, the great gong sounded. The tower that faced eastward, the sea of clay. Retribution had arrived. Matching the rivers of blood, The red sun hung low as it delivered atavism to the steep walls of the holiest of all cities, Perilith. Each procession of the dedicated warriors came with a simple retainer of servants, armorers, and thralls from the worldly peoples. The latter caste of enslaved were detained at the gates and swiftly executed, so their blood flowed away from the gilded city. Their service to the clavigers was no longer required, nor was the liquid in their veins pure as that of the temple-born to be allowed entry. As the riot of horror clamored the underbelly of the monumental city, the 9 were given holy escort to the fortress that encapsulated the pyramid, calmly bathing in the ritual pools in the towering gardens, and cleansed themselves of the filth of the soil that clung to their boots. The warriors ignored the cloud of gloom that hung over the parapet, red that painted the foundations. It was not wherewithal or mercy that stayed their blades, but the impression of haste that had been on the tongues of the holy messengers. The uprising was only a portent of the very heart of why they made a dutiful return to Perilith. A most holy task awaited. But first, they took to the towers and eradicated the priests. Entrails were flung from the heights. Lifeless heads bounced. The resistance was negligible, and diplomacy was no object to the holy revenants. Cold and swift as the ataract, they whet their blades on the blood of the holiest caste. A few of the priests preferred to jump from the tower's heights. Death, it seemed, was just a leap forward for a heart warmed by faith. Extravagant ceremony was rushed as the 9 separate parties arrived. As was tradition, 3 who entered from each face of the pyramid, save the exedrant, the 4th tunnel, from which only the steward of the pyrolith could set foot within. 3 tunnels for 9 sacred guardians. A deep hum resonated from the gong's temple at dusk, giatic and thunderous. The clavigers entered. Metal sung as the 9 holy warriors crossed into the grand threshold in unison. Their gold corselets and chain jingled, sheaths holding terrible blades bounced, and the silken robes were tugged by a hidden wind. All 9 holy warriors converged at the pedestal at the central dais. Dagger-sharp channels ran downstream to the dark heart of the temple, where the great face of the host and the Hyperphant waited. Electric anxiety filled the cavernous structure as the only sound were the echoes of armament castling ghostly tones from wall to wall. The clavigers were true to their reputation, stoic and unfazed by the current state of what raged outside the walls. Walking manifestations of the unyielding host's power, tools bred for pure intent. Any lesser born than the priests would have crumpled and wept at their presence. They drew a steely, simultaneous halt. "Clavigers, your presence has been eagerly awaited," addressed the head Hyperphant, clad in gold to match, unfolding his arms, voice weighing heavily with intention. "Only for your most noble covenant has this meeting been arranged. The last oath that has yet to be broken." For a group of statues, the clavigers seemed rather animated by the last remark, creaking their serpentine ornamentation. "I regret your holy steel has already been stained by the cowards of the corrupted order. Nonetheless, it was demanded by our host that the priests be dealt with preemptively." The Hierophant could not hide the glee in his tone. "Forgive this digression." Nothing was acknowledged, not even a grunt. A tough crowd, the clavigers. "Ages have passed since the covenant of retribution has been enacted, when all others were destroyed. The age of sedition, when the oaths of the weak-veined were forsaken for betrayal, when the tyrant King Galadarian was slain, seizing our lands, the blasphemers hacked our golden lines away like a forest of flesh until the last blades, the first clavigers, remained to protect our sacred host. Do you recall the annals? Their bitter blood still coats your unwashed blades, a reminder of the foul betrayal of the weaker races of men. They stirred. This recital of history was ancient as their torture into a machine-like existence. I recall their words of death as vivid today as they were spoken before me. A curse on the false cults, cowards one and all who betrayed the unyielding hosts, rats who would harry a wounded serpent. A curse upon the great traitor, Voarn, and his vagabond armies. His gore shall fashion a loyal gauntlet of retribution as firm and unyielding as its host, who will avenge this cowardice tenfold. They shall be known as clavigers. Nodding to himself, the steward scanned the masked crowd of clavigers, peering into the mesh of gold as if to stare into their countenances. It was said that the embalming process, soaking them in a comatose state for 100 cycles, suffered them the kind of sadistic agonies that ordinary flesh would revolt against. Their reward? To become the only army the host ever needed, holy vindicators who alone were granted the divine tasks of war, bloodshed, and acting as his gauntlet. Mercenaries and hardened warriors sought to avoid confronting a claviger at all costs. Their reputation as mindless zealots was almost worth more than their prowess itself. Little wonder why some of the priests had preferred suicide over the meat grinder of their blades. Today, this for such retribution. A false prophet who walked among our kin has stolen a totem most sacred. The cartouche, a beating heart of our unyielding host. Without it, our host will decay to decadence. Only the maggots of men, the very cowards who sought to bring our host to doom, could be to blame. They've employed this false prophet, even as he has plundered our vaults and escapes to the edges of this world. Perilith rots for this outrage. The head Hierophant growled. For this, only retribution can suffice. Scour the land, root this heretic out, and bring the cartouche and him back here to me, alive. None shall resist your plight. Let none prevent your deeds. Should any fool or power intervene, they will be hewn down by your sacred blades. You are the will of our host. You speak as he, and the impure shall dread you as they dread he. The false prophet shall boil under our temple for 1,000 years for his heresy, as should all his kind. As they hung on to his every word, the priest delivered prophecy. Heresy is the final seal, the symbol of the approaching zenith. The coming of this false prophet heralds a new age, where the world shall be rendered ripe for our host's reign over mortality, boomed the steward, circling twice so their voice was seen by all of the warriors in full. And prepare the world, we shall. Every claviger bowed deep, sinking despite their armament, prostrating themselves evenly before the dais and golden face. And then, suddenly, reality dimmed as a voice hissed deep in the bowels of the temple that was not of any priest or man, but a chilling incantation that hellishly rang equally in echo. My name will be revealed again. Heed or suffer. Not a figure moved from their reverence, quivering in their armor and robes, as the unearthly voice drilled them to perfect silence. All dread was wiped clean that moment. No longer was there any doubt that the covenant of retribution was to be fulfilled. When gods spoke, the dutiful listened. A servant produced a clamshell wrought of astral obscurity, a speech box. It would deliver their deity's commands directly if he saw fit. One claviger was designated its bearer and clung to it as a newborn. When it was clear there would be no other command, the head Hyperphant pontificated. The cartouche of our host cannot stay in the hands of the corrupt. Sacrifice yourself if it means reclaiming this relic. Our oaths demand nothing less. Go forth, key holders, and claim for our kin our rightful covenant of revenge. Unleash your wrath upon the worms of this wretched land. Find the scourge. Find the false prophet. Recover the cartouche, our sacred relic. Metallic voice wavering into madness, heating the air with righteous fury. He spurred them. Go forth and reave, clavigers! Reave! So the hunt began. Part 1. The Romelander. Chapter 1. Among Men. Outside the arid plains of Prosper Fade, ever was there a hunger for justice that gnawed no less than any other settlement. It filled the wrinkled corners of the eyes of every earth-tender and farmer who toiled to feed the ungrateful hordes who packed the walls of the much safer, much filthier slums of the urban sprawls of Smoke, or Iban. For every jug of grain that flowed across the trade roads, there were 2 disappearances amongst their tribes that went unresolved. All the tribes wanted was to forget about the wastes, yet the wastes refused to forget them. The price of freedom from the cartels and guilds of the cities meant reavers, bandits, beasts, and abnormality sprayed on the tribes with impunity, so their existence would fluctuate or cease altogether. Some wished that it would so that the kings of gluttony in the Valley of Smoke would starve, the metropolis who cheated on their tributes back to settlements be hollowed and dwindle into dust. But then, once in a while, the caravans returned from the cities, swimming in the luxuries of technology, medicine, and the ambrosia of narcotics, crystalline amaranth, sharp sugar, and the fungal monstera. Like the fattened sows, the drugs made the men of the outland settlements dulled to the injustices that tore their women away, chewed on the bones of their children, and threatened to level the very earth they stood on. In stubborn lethargy, they persisted in the ruins of their forefathers. Who could blame them when their cities were erected in the graves of 100 fallen empires? Apocalypse did not just touch stone and earth. It persisted as a plague of spirit, a neurotic fermentation reminding them of the fallen histories. And yet, they avidly lived, a weed among the races of mortals. Humans aggressively sought to thrive in their surroundings, millennia after millennia of scraping for survival. Not even the gods could deny such dogged persistence. Golden amaranth danced under the crimson glow, and a trickster appeared from the wastes outside Fade, pondering the existence of humans as he entered their settlement. It was always so for the one who called himself merely Wanderer. Always a new outpost sprouted from the earth for him to visit, a new tribe, a little different from their predecessors, repeating the same mistakes with maddening irony, indulging the same vices, never to break free of the vicious cycle, birth, struggle, death. He always wondered how he'd have fared as a human, or a mortal. In his admitted arrogance, the Wanderer was so sure he'd avoid the same pitfalls of misery. Empires would be crafted after his image, and he'd even unlearn his instincts. All delusions, but an engaging mind game that presented him an intellectual challenge. Passing his time, the Wanderer would carve problems in plain speak, in overhangs and on menhirs along the road, writing his solutions to these quandaries in chalk, fantasizing that a self-aware human like himself would eventually follow the trail of crumbs and rediscover themselves through his inscriptions. He would lead himself out of mortality. To his great disappointment, throughout his existence, no human, or any mortal for that matter, had even discovered this game. "I'm cursed to watch them suffer in repetition forever," he grumbled as he shuffled into the common area of the settlement, clustered around a theatron, an auditorium or court of yore. He, however, very much doubted that Fade, or its denizens, engaged in such activity as drama in this age. Snorting, he chided himself. But of course the Sea of Clay did not languish in luxury as others did, and after all, he wasn't just accustomed to the rough-and-tumble life of the Outlander. The Wanderer had grown fond of the hand-to-mouth existence that brought conflict with every day. Long had he earned his namesake, merely meandering amongst their civilizations, both rural and urban, ignoring any quest. The old theatron, carved out of the slope of the towering bluff, had been somewhat cannibalized, limestone seating repurposed to serve as foundations or counterweights. Half of it was occupied by a knot of shepherds who squabbled over a game of rolling bones. The remainder, in shade, hide rolls, some of their flock, and an assortment of trinkets atop a tattered banner. Winnings. The Wanderer had other business, but the sound of bones clicking, the jeering of the gamblers, tantalized. Luck was a vice too sweet for him to ignore. A breath later, he added to the pile as collateral. "Another player?" He fluted in the nomad tongue used by Fade and the plains, grating and lingering. Bushy brows lifted, but none denied his request. "Good. I love a good game." Immersed in the spirit, the Wanderer hollered as his bones were knocked out of the center, spitting as his rivals won. Another loss. He'd already lost half a pouch of his sequor, but the blithesome air of the game overrode the loss of bartering coins. Not a shepherd blinked twice at him, or interrogated his passions. The Wanderer was veiled to their valid suspicion of such a character appearing to join their game. By his sorcery, he was cloaked as one of them after all, a human. A feature of his design, the Wanderer long assumed the form of a neighboring tan-beak-nosed plains dweller. None would ever have suspected him to be a chameleon, or any sorcery. The flesh transmutation process was flawless, at least to most. A disturbing but rare few were able to see through the Wanderer's external appearances. Of those, all were shapeshifters like him, except one. A disconcerting memory suddenly apparated in his mind, eyes like razor bulbs against a black night, the hulking shadow of a mutant whose gaze was piercing. It knew him. A tunnel closed, earth grinding into the din, groaning as foundations shattered asunder. Despair screamed at him, and a voice like steel reverberated like a tolling bell. The nightmare consumed the present. Disturbed, the wanderer tried to shake it. He had no recollection of where the memory came from. Nostalgic visions crippled him without warning, never when he expected it. This one had come before, once. Meaning was muddled in the absence of the dream's context, for the wanderer didn't know if it was even real or a trick of his hyperactive mind. One of the side effects of living beyond what the mundane flesh could ever tolerate. "Your role," one of the shepherds grunted, slapping his shoulder. "We're waiting for you to lose." "Sorry, I'm thirsted," babbled the wanderer, and played. Bones bounced and toppled harmlessly and separated without clustering or knocking out the others. A fumble. No luck. "Here, drink." A pouch extended over the limestone block used as the game table. Sour clung to the teeth and tongue. Then came the sweet font of the fermented honey. Nectar to the dust in the wanderer's throat. Beard flecked with silver and bits of red, the man received his drinking skin back. "Your family won't take kindly to you losing all your sequor, eh?" "Winnings from the caravans." "I didn't bring my flock to gamble," chortled the wanderer. Nodding, one of the others rolled. He lost. Now the wanderer was back in, for a time. "Gosh, say, what? Caravans?" The wanderer racked his head at the lore of the area. "Outcasts from the Blue Tablet. My kin don't mind a change of scenery." "Must have been low caste that bred an ugly like you." The banter and insult crudely bounced around, like the dice. The senior shepherd admitted. "Haven't made their way to fate for many cycles, they haven't. Gut's been dry as of late, putting those dogs out west." "Yes, the raiders are growing bolder," the wanderer added. Predictably, they ate it up. In their consensus, some charity was shown his way. The shepherds chalked up his loss as a trade for gossip. Such nuggets of opportunity fell into the wanderer's lap with little effort. Questioning turned into interrogation, but he played off the ignorant plains dweller all too grateful for their hospitality. While he answered their questions, he began crafting his own. "Traders aren't happy. That Blue Prince prepares for war, stealing many stores for their campaign. Blue Tablet is barren." He wove the half-truth deftly, rolling bones without so much a glance where they landed. "Word is, the Erglonians will claim the Gap of Glassmark and continue west. Many families leave, like ours." Disbelief trembled in the elder shepherd's voices. "Glassmark? Impossible. No thing could make it across that strip of hell. They'd quicker cross the Zarad through the north." "That's what the Blue Prince fears," trailed the wanderer, shrugging. "Ergalon will choke on its pride one cycle." "Whole land is going mad. Just like those golden maggots who came through, plundering us on their route to the holy city," scoffed another. Playing stupid. "Holy city?" "Are some kind of holy place. Unrest going on from what it sounds. Blood fills your streets. An infernal air leaks from behind those great walls." "No. Who were these golden maggots? Call themselves something fierce? A warrior king or something? Didn't dare to ask too many questions of any man or thing dressed like that," puffed one, skinny-legged and wrinkled more than the most. "Fed his retainer who lodged at my stead. Fleeced me of my grain. I say to my woman, leave them. We don't want their trouble. Or blades. I heard them called Cavgor or something. Let's pray they don't come through here again," grumbled the white-speckled Redbeard, knuckles whitening on his staff. The wanderer digested the intelligence. God, what abominations they must witness in that evil place. The gambling lulled. Cursing the existence of the holy city, the shepherds went on rambling yarns of prediction on what the purpose of the Kavgor was. Rumor became speculative fantasy, depictions of a golden demigod whose very presence summoned a rain of blood and brimstone. On and on they questioned what such a warrior had any reason to pass through the ruins of Prosperfade and harass her pastoral denizens. Still questioning the full story, the wanderer knew the answer. It dangled under the tattered wool poncho, the prize he'd plundered from the vault underneath the Temple of Perilith, the black three-faced artifice who captured no light nor reflected the red sun's glory. The cartouche. Ignorance was a luxury of the tribes. What lay beneath the long golden grasses and stray weeds of the plains that their sheep chewed on was of no concern to the Hummins of Prosperfade, so long as it remained buried under the flagstone. Like all other tribes who settled in the shells of their former civilizations, the Hummins had a maddening dissatisfaction with the knowledge of what kind of soil they were planting their roots in. Perfectly blissful to not know what danger lurked just a spear's length beneath their feet. Her old name, Tower of Fade, held no such true threats, but was unexplored until the wanderer had stumbled on a passage in the annals musing in the terracotta court. Once it had stood a dutiful sentry to the south and eastern reach of the ancient imperial Sayosh. Earth consumed her, along with most of her features, and none of the plainsfolk would have any inclination that the Theatron was the youngest ruin that stood in Fade. Not all the tower had been lost to the ages, though. Plying root walls and moss webs, the Wanderer, also known by his moniker in Perilith as the False Prophet, hacked his way through the subterranean vent, sliding down dirt where the growth stubbornly relented its grasp. He dropped to the uneven earth floor, filling the outer bastion. The torch he clutched revealed the aquatic rust of green painted the walls. The tang in the air tasted as blood. An outer bastion of metal that would have served to keep out whatever dwelled in the wastes eons before. Not so different than the Holy of Holies, muttered the Wanderer, on account of the ever-present tang in the catacombs beneath Perilith. Even he found discomfort delving into the cloying steam of the subterranean pools of gore, but it had been necessary. Peering in every crevice, torchlight exposed each shadow. It was as he had left it so many cycles ago, the only virtual difference being the layer of dirt and dust collected since his last visit. A half-filled arcade led him to the inner chamber, reminiscent of the flute instrument of the primitive Mondoans, their bone whistlers. Save the equidistant craft etched into the metal turret and its central instrument, a centrifuge of cracked glass. The Wanderer was unsure of its portents, save the strange red metal structure within the tube was uncannily the imitation of an artery, complete with its wiry branches of veins. He'd seen such artifices made with that ore before, though not in that fashion, nor unable to kiss the open sky where the red sun ruled. Suspect of ancient sorcery that Hummins had long since abandoned, or forgotten. At the base of the centrifuge was a concave terminal, shaped like a teardrop of the same opaque, seamless crystal, cradled by a winged pedestal of bronze. His destination. Fingers hesitated on the wool poncho. Age didn't affect the Wanderer, but anxiety of the unknown certainly did. No one truly knows, he whispered. A century of subversion, espionage, and waxing his way through the ranks of the cult of the unyielding host. So used to his camouflage as he had forgotten what his true skin even felt like. to ascend to the caste of priests, all just to be within reach of the artifact, and now he hesitated to use it. It was the supreme irony. To become so captured by the quest, and yet once he had it, superstition restrained him. Would it work? Would it destroy him? Would it alert the holy city to its whereabouts? One was as likely as the other. Only one way I find out, he mused. Glowing dully in the light was the onyx amulet, framed with golden iconography on each plate. It was built for no man in size. A canopic repository the size of a fist lay in the apex, containing a horrifying unknown. Magnificent and terrible, the nightmarish three-sided artifice appeared just as imposing as it had in the vault beneath the temple. The flint reflection caught the torch and suddenly snuffed it out in a thaumaturgical flash. The cartouche glinted terrible in its condemnation. Fascinating, he breathed. Immediately, the darkness was illuminated with a faint crimson glow. No, it grew and intensified within a breath. Pulsating red light ignited the centrifuge, and energy flowed up the artery. It was too mighty. Glass tempered to handle the fusion of raw mana began to strain, even crack under the pressure. Green flakes sprinkled from the walls that trembled as the very earth shook them off. But these were all temporalities. Humming of truth filled the wanderer's body. Not a sound, but resonance, with energy that birthed from the dark amulet. He'd felt this only once before at such a terminal, though the font of power could not have been more different. The very threads of his shifting flesh felt as though they were unraveling and splintering from his skeleton. Likewise, whatever entity of spirit he called his soul seemed to be magnetized to the power, as if he were a serpent drawn to the sun's gaze. With mindless excitement, the wanderer gripped the cartouche. By the creators, it is not a catalyst of power, but the very source of it. Raw power. Crimson saturated every surface. A high whine sung discord in the air. Metal groaned. Glass that was not glass at all began to crack further as the centrifuge threatened to shatter by the glory charged from the amulet. Superheated bronze sizzled the air. The terminal could not handle such a conquering, comparable source of energy. Fearful, knowing that his curiosity brought destruction, the wanderer attempted to peel the amulet from the terminal. It did not budge. Sweat beaded on his brow as he failed to pry it free. For a moment the inner turret was caught in limbo. Red light held as the artery bled its power, sapping the illumination slowly down the centrifuge. Dominating energy erupted from the cartouche that had once lit the entire of Pyrrolith in its bioluminescent glory. The trinket was sentient, godlike even, a long-held breath and total shudder as finally the ancient crystal device came to a halt, loosened by the cartouche's draw. The wanderer was no longer doubtful if the hundreds of cycles penetrating the holy city had been worth it. The artifice proved not any mere decorative bauble, but the icon that protected a great and terrible thing. His tense fingers graced the cool black metal of the plates, warm like the flesh, yet unaltered, unlike the smoking furnace that the terminal had become. Relief was brief. Shadow returned to rule the ruin as the wanderer ascended the root forest, muttering, "Powerful indeed. Too powerful." He pondered why his missive was so vague, his mission ambiguous. How would the cartouche react to its destined recipient? Was it the key or the lock? Harder questions now appeared where the softer ones had burned away in the Tower of Fade. Enough time had been squandered in Fade. The end of his millennia-long journey awaited. Pausing only for a cask of sour honey, the shapeshifter made for the cracked clay of the eastern road. He'd have spare time to pore over his discovery. Anxiety to distance himself from Perilith and head eastward grew on the moment. Smoke smudged the limestone walls. Vagrants and squatters roamed like dogs, and the filth ran as tall as the wild grass between the stone. The darkening ruby of twilight fabricated a monster out of the shattered walls of Fade. Her maze of corridors and dead ends were a nightmare for any careless traveler. Bisecting the old city was a trench that spat one out to either the overshadowing bluffs or the sea of prairie. Marrow's Cut, or simply the Cut, the long and decrepit highway. Drifting from the deluge of the sunken city were shadows of men. "You!" rasped an errant voice among them. First he ignored the beckon. That speaker approached, a sharp stone and thong clutched. Vagabonds. Soon a pack of such leering figures aroused to surround the wanderer, blocking his route to freedom. Slings were not uncommon weapons, and Fade had no guard, but as such, many disputes were dealt in duels and jabs in the dark. "Saw you gamble. You've got Sequor to spare," hissed the vagrant, "and we got debts to pay." The wanderer cursed himself. He was getting sloppy by using the same disguises. Noticing one had not risen, a meaty figure lingering in the shadows, observing remotely, the wanderer cocked his head and made a subtle gesture. "Help?" Bushy brows lowered, but the large man stayed put. Perhaps negotiating could work. "Oh, friends, but I lost my coin this day. I'm sorry. Maybe we spill you open and find that out ourselves." "And what debts do you hold? Sharp sugar, I imagine." A rhetorical question. Even in the afternoon haze, the maws of the vagrants shone with decay, their sallow and sunken skin easy to spot. Each settlement had their share of such addicts. "Eh? What does it matter to a dead man?" "I just so happen—" The wanderer gazed towards a man sitting in the shadow, with intent, slowly shifting his poncho. "To have some sharp sugar on me. Here, take it." Slavering at the mouth, the vagrants howled for his blood, hoisting their sharpened stones. Yet they hesitated to cave his skull in. Lust was a quality all its own. "And I have more to spare for the road, and more crab than I could ever hope to eat." "Says you. And why don't we just take it?" "I have a partner waiting on the road. He'll not answer but to me. He holds the cash." He negotiated. Standing behind the confrontation, the brawny loner unfolded and wandered into the cluster. In his leathery palms was the cane of a shepherd, his dark brows lowered and stern, body language standoffish. An outsider to the gang. The wanderer grinned, which must have looked mad. "Hand over the sugar and take us to your cart." Rough hands seized the wanderer, and he did not resist, still eyeing the cane-wielding watcher. "Quit squirming," harassed those other shadows who ripped at the wanderer's clothing, searching for their addiction. They recoiled sluggishly as something interrupted robbery, a cane falling like a mace. An axe snapped somewhere among the shadows as the air whistled and the cane struck in succession, only grunts from the wielder. The intense red light made hell for the cravens, who poorly defended themselves, wildly stumbling amidst a blur of motion. Like dogs they snapped and scattered. Yowling and barking insults, the cowardly vagrants scurried into the maze to lick their wounds, leaving one behind, dead with his stalk twisted like a wrung chicken. "Pleasant day to you all," mocked the wanderer, wincing. There was a grunt from the cane-wielder. "And me? You, my friend, are welcome to my acquaintances, and my stores of sugar." Giving him a burly grimace, the outcast shepherd still gripped the stave tightly, swaying unsteadily. The foul, sour odor of the distilled honey was rank from his tattered clothing. His appearance garnered a smile from the wanderer. A drunk with a vile temper, and a big drunk at that, a bull of a man. If the wanderer was any captain of sentries, he'd have the man flogged immediately. A judge, and the man would be hanging from the ramparts by his ankles. Instead, the wanderer clapped the shoulder of his savior, and rewarded him with a cask sloshing with honey liquor. Fortune lent him grace with such a suitable, exploitable companion, a most desirable puppet who would kill for crumbs. The wanderer was not a charitable leader or benefactor. Everything was a tool to him, especially anything of flesh and blood. Nothing out of wickedness or malevolence. Simply the reality that the wanderer did not find it distasteful to wield humans like a hammer or wheel. How could he not? Mortals bred like the prairie crabs, extinguished as swift as the red sun's demise. "You did not lie." Gruff, the drunk sounded more accusatory than querying. Producing a small grain of the crystal drug, the wanderer held it aloft to catch the ruby light. Sharp sugar, depending on its purity, had a lucid diamond sparkle. It found its way into the drunk's leathery palm and was pocketed instantly. "Your friends?" "Not anymore." A wry grin spread on the wanderer's tanned face. "I require a deputy to handle brigands and unpleasantries. For your service you'll be paid handsomely in more sugar, wines, and coin." A convinced grunt this time. No smooth talking needed, as the drunk asked, "Where to, stranger?" "First, Blue Tablet. Then, north." Walking into the dimming light, he offered, "Come, friend, let's be swift. Those wretched dogs will return for revenge, though I think they'll not follow us into the cut. Come now." Part 1, Chapter 2. Lordless Lands. In a sea where no hull plowed water, no paddle cut wave, nor fish swam, there was no true master. Succor of anarchy, a realm of teeth and lust, the sea of clay. Between reefs of soapstone and shelves of earth, the prairie of rust and gold was no less safe a traverse than any seaward span, a land where no city could stand. Notched into its rolling quests and sweeping descents was a fishbone of a footpath, thin, endlessly slicing, jagged and untamed. There were no laws or landmarks in the ancient tundra-turned-silty savanna, nor any foliage besides tangled sage. Unmarked graves on the sides of the cut filled with the abandoned bones of unfortunate travelers. A battlefield of ambition. Tromping eastwards, the wanderer found the back of the saddle of his long-necked looper a dull existence. No matter how hard they were yoked or reined, the gainly and antlered beasts, stubborn, maintained a sluggish gait wherever you directed them. Only a hunting ergoz could provoke lopers into frantic galloping. "Idiot beasts," he had said more than a few times. 3 cycles leaving Fade and huts to their backs, the pair of travelers were immersed in the heart of the prairie. Crossing it thus far had proved uneventful, too much for the wanderer's liking. Banditry was the cut's legacy, its heritage. Foreboding, he felt like a woman traveling unaccompanied in the more unpalatable pits that one found in a city at night. Boredom led his restless mind to drift into hypothesis about his findings of the artifact. Yakul was the impudent hillman's name, none too talkative of his history. All the wanderer gleaned was that he was more scavenger than herder, and the bearded giant had no love for Fade, even less so for the hordes of goons who he'd given a beating earlier. His nose was ringed red. No sooner than they'd taken off that he snorted the sharp sugar. The wanderer wondered if the addict would prove useful. "Blue tablet is for merchants," said the man, after resting through the midnight shade. Then, without waiting for a reply, Yakul demanded, "Why do we travel there?" "And what business is that to you?" "No merchants there now, only war." "So I've heard. I have other business there. With war comes desperation, friend." More road gave way to more road. Only a herd of wild spear-faced loper grazing the fields were company. The great herbivores broke the monotony of the plains. Yakul eyed the long-necked giants, drowning the dust and heat with the sour honey. "Blue tablet is a tomb." "Tombs, my unimaginative friend, are full of wonderful and forgotten things. You just need to know where to look and where to, step. All the true riches of the world cannot be seen." A breeze was conjured, dry and full of subtle hints. The wanderer sniffed. Rot and charred bones drifted down the hills northward. An encampment perched above the cut. "Yai! Raiders! They've taken the high ground," he spat. Yakul spun in the rough saddle. "Where? I do not see them." "Because you rely only on your eyes." The wanderer tapped his nose. "The Plains Lord used the hills to spy on the goings of caravans. We'll earn their lust if we stay the course." "So, do we?" Punctuating the silence was the hoofed feet stamping the earth. "We stay the course." On the crest of the Ogre Hill, a fire crackled from a pit, and a great carcass created a communion. Spitted between bones forged from its brothers was a charred loper that fed an entire tribe. Nothing of the great herbivore was wasted, as her skin was fashioned into spotted tents, sinew woven into thread, even her antlered skull a cradle for the newborn. It was true the raiders of the plains were to blame for ravaging the trade lanes, but none could accuse them of leaving anything to waste. Once the raiders had been called Oxymos, as their coastal cousins did. Now, the nameless nomads, whose heirlooms of conquest didn't know their ancestors were the progenitors of Fade and Blue Tablet. Dogs deprived to history, gnawing on the scraps that civilization spit out. Feuding with one another, the chiefs of the plain hadn't so much as intermarried for a millennia, save for the occasional rape. But the civilized did not pay dowries to savages. Naked bodies lay strewn around the pit, many tangled in pairs or squatting under the roasting flesh. A few lazy sentries dozed or aimlessly wandered. Shade brought an orgy of feasting that would evaporate when the sun rose. Another hunt would send the camp prowling the hills. Until then, the primitive luxuries would sate their bellies. But peace didn't last. Erupting from the midst of their camp came a howling of aberrance, a guttural and hoarse thing that shattered the still night air. The ugly sound sent the camp in a panic. Warriors loosed javelin into the darkness. Lean guard dogs howled. Women shrieked and snagged their offspring, and the entire tribe recoiled at the very sound. Tents were loosed from the earth, and lopers were settled with haste. Hell could be seen reflected in the eyes of the nomads in that brief moment. Several challenges were called out to the darkness, rigid and anticipation. The horrid flesh-splitting roar came again, this time just at firelight's edge. Abandoning the great pit and bluff overlooking the cut, the raiders retreated down the neck of the hill and into the night, without so much as a thought of a fight. Spooked them, that did. Yakul was eyeing the hill where the smoke trailed from the pit. Their ride at dawn took them right underneath the steep grade of the overlook. He sniffed and dosed up. Nasty things dwell in these hills, more than any band of marauders. I did not see you on the saddle last night. Granting his companion a wry grin, and no more. The wanderer did not divulge any secrets of subterfuge. They rode in silence for some time, watching the spectacle of carnage. Vultures came by the dozens to feast. Carrion squawked over the pickings from the charred skeleton. A dark shape wheeled overhead, sending the scavengers scattering. A camrosh that dove and challenged the spoils. Black feathers flew in a cloud. On Basque, not even the scraps of decay went uncontested. More ogre faces sprouted from the hillside. The cut submitted and wound a corridor that hugged the rocks, forcing the riders to move single file as the trade road narrowed. Erosion gouged the hillside where a slide of clay found its way into the steep crevasse, and a stream crawled far below them. Down there in the shade, bits of soapstone seemed to crawl and shamble across the sheer faces. The stench of a carcass rose from the crevasse. Yakul's fried sense of smell ailed him. Despite an unnaturally long life, the miasma of maggots and dead things had not grown on the wanderer, who wrinkled his nose. Graves and battlefields were the last places he ever wanted to visit. Thankfully, a breeze banished the stench southward. And then, uttering a tone compared to his earlier remarks, Yakul spoke. To the north of the grazing lands were mountains bordering the Zerad. Caves in those rocks, and sounds came from them. Banging, clashing, grinding. But no man dwells in the Zerad. One night we got close. It was a mistake. The wanderer patiently awaited the next part. Drowning his story with an unopened cask of the sour honey, Yakul resumed his stupor and silence. He resigned to staring back towards the hill and the ugly creature that occupied it. So you are from the Zerad, then? No, I'm Indosh. Yakul was swarthy, genetically a hillman, but belonging to an unknown tribe. On the few maps locked deep in the terracotta court and under close guard of the spidery-fingered scholars, the Zerad was illustrated an impressive smear of tan, an impassable, unassailable anvil of salt and heat that kept the south from expanding north, and vice versa. Rumors, if they could be believed, at face value, told that at the heart of the boiling waste was a necropolis of green rusted bronze, the bones of a hyper-civilization, Syosha. One of the lost Gahite? The man nodded. Well, that explained his vitriol for his fellow kinsmen. The Gahite made Vishmak clan blood feuds look like neighborly disagreements. Musing, prodding. I wonder what flocks have to eat around that wasteland. Even goats seek green shoots in the rocks. They don't. We were hunting those little devils, and their Tigris masters who kidnapped the herds. Claimed it was payment for unpaid dowries. Tigris could claim more justified raids and kinslaying more than even the gods could their rivals. The picture was becoming even clearer. I see. And your band you traveled with, where are they? Snuffed in the rocks. Bees trapped and ate them cold, opening their bellies like rats. I dragged myself to Fade, following the Tigris. Ah, no use salting the wound, but he was intrigued. How many cycles ago? I lost count. Impressing even his memory, the nomadic raiders did not return to ply the cut for plunder. There was no sign of any malcontent to either end of the plains road, annulled to peace. The wanderer took it in stride. The going continued without comment from Yakul, besides his muttering of names under breath. Fallen brethren, guide rivals, or other figures of his past. The man's demons stank on his breath. Expansive hills and slopes of grass did not reveal any landmark under the wide and vacant sky. Well, they were away from the hill, back onto the flatter portion of the plain, when a speck appeared before them against a slope. A train of something that drew towards them. Dust peppered the horizon. More raiders? Yakul slurred. No. Wagons. Saw the birds. Thought it might warrant our spears, grunted the sergeant. Clad in bronze harness and a polished girdle, the mercenary was no green-eyed merchant's son. He spoke idly and bored. The raids have been fierce, cycles of late. One would expect banditry. But what of our sister caravan? They couldn't have missed them, Sergeant Pedaxis, interrupted a puffy Humman noble. His brows were manicured, bejeweled cuffs ornamenting his silk robes. Explain to this churl, I command him. He will divulge all the truth of this wretched land, otherwise gut him. The wanderer chortled back. He was amused, even while detained. By absurd custom, the higher caste of Blue Tablet did not speak directly to the lesser, the unwashed grovelers, including outsiders. The curly-haired, golden-skinned Oximer were fanatics for their punitive and creative caste system. At birth, if lily flowers blossomed in the ladies' temple pools, you were a lucky member of the Excelsiites. If the lily pads were bare, then at best a position of war or craftsmanship. Lily pads that were brown and dead meant the glorious existence of a rat and filth collector. The priests, or concords of the lady, had decided upon the caste on a basis nobody knew, but the wanderer long suspected it correlated with the lavish donations to the temple by the family of the newborn, who also just happened to sit on the top of the hierarchy. A conflict of interest that no one disputed within earshot of Blue Tablet. Yakul and the wanderer were quite low on the list of respectables. The hillman perched on a rock, encircled by the merchant's entourage, never too far from their knives or spears. Go on, tell him, insisted Pedaxis. I'm afraid we saw no such thing. No caravan. Not even remains, replied the wanderer. It's not possible. They couldn't have missed them, not on the cut. They'd been pushed aside for them to pass. Mercy of the Lady Azure, they had half a cohort to guard their wares. This cannot be so. Pedaxis shrugged. By his emblems pinning his tunic, he was no mere hired blade. The topaz crest matched the nobleman's medallion bouncing off his chest, making him a droplet of blood removed from the family. Yet his countenance was not of family loyalty. An interesting mix of a man. Lies! They are knaves and no more than they say, squealed the nobleman. So what then, Lord? You're the guard, man. You seize them, search them. The air of vexation wrinkling his brow, the sergeant nodded to his detachment. Like hyenas, they dug at the two travelers. Clawing back and snarling, the hillmen put up a hell of a fight, forcing one guardsman onto the dirt with a shattered pelvis and another reeling with a shattered mouth. Stop squirming, the wanderer tasting dirt. He regretted his decision to hail the caravan when his own cloak was thrown aside by Pedaxis and his prize was revealed. Strapped to his ribs by leather strips, the dark treasure shone dully against the sun. Confusion riddled the sergeant's face. Stand him up. What's on your neck? What is it, Pedaxus? Not sure. The bewildered guard stared at the cartouche, then at the wanderer. Explain this to me. I can't, lowering his voice to a whisper. See here, traveler. If it's within my power, I can have you let loose. The wanderer shook his head. Do what you must. Pedaxus didn't ask twice. He reached and pried the artifice free and held it aloft. To the discomfort of the sergeant, it weighed no less than a small anvil. Guards jeered at the prize, drawn to its alien features. Silk curtains were thrust aside as suddenly a woman's shapely face emerged from the wagon. Her face was framed by an ornamental coiled mane that went from chin to crown. A beauty cut too pure for the rugged plains. Her eyes were green as sea foam. Crescito, why have we stopped? Oh, but what is that bauble? Do not use my name so idly in front of the low-born Lady Scythe. We're dealing with brigands. I'll summon you when you are needed, else your uncouth behavior is unbecoming of my status. She did not so much as recoil at her husband's barking. Lord, Pedaxus had offered Crescito the dark treasure, feigning recognition in the artifact that would fool no gambler. But yes, I've seen this, displayed in the Hall of Sarthicus. He showed it to me once before. An ancient relic he prized deeply. He raised his voice, and there was no mistaking the authentic venom in it. They've slain our sister caravan, and thought they could pawn treasure off unto the ignorant. These vile vermin deserve nothing less than the cruelest of torture. How should we do it, Sergeant Pedaxus? Flay them? Chain them to the earth and fill their ears and mouths with honey for the crabs to find? I do not care. You are the master of pain here. Rubbing his salt and pepper chin. I do not deal in torture, Lord. A simple death by beheading would suffice. No, that is mercy. I will not deliver mercy to... A shadow darkened the interrogation. A distant heavy beating of wings. Obscuring the great red sun was a griffonic outline of ugliness that was neither bird nor beast. The Camrosh again. In its talons it carried a charred spine of a larger creature, and was a miracle it did not fall to the earth. The omen quelled their words until it passed and made for the arid southern plain, loosing a cry that sent every field mouse, every earth scuttler and vulture in hiding. One of the guards exhaled. Flying devil! Carrying the bones of the field! Aye, it is a sign. Religious incantations followed amongst the armored men who reached for idols or talismans. Even the nobleman hesitated to speak, his eyes flickering to the sky in disbelief. Stubbornness was also a quality all its own. Lord, we cannot slay these men. They are protected by a demon. Not just a veteran and a free thinker. This sergeant was a superstitious one, too. Crescito harumphed. Foolish. That omen could mean 100 things. These brigands are as common as the shrubs. The wanderer stated, I can lead you to your sister caravan. It is hidden. Release us. Tell this groveling dog he cannot make demands, for I... Tell him, the wanderer interrupted. If he does not listen, he can keep the black treasure. His friends' wagons are booby-trapped. If we go to the grave, none of the treasure will be recovered. The bait had been placed before them. Pedaxus looked like a man truly torn. Was he a man who valued gold over his curiosity? The cartouche had taken his eye, all while his noble master slobbered at the mention of plunder. Thrusting his fingers in his girdle, the sergeant shook his head. Sire, if this is true, Sarthakis' heirs will greatly reward us for recovering his inheritance, if any survive the siege. And that Camrosh, blazing Basque. But we cannot discount the omen, Lord. We can send for the treasure another time. Loins of the lady, Sergeant. By then it will be gone. Some bold thief will steal the fortune of my old rival before we reach Nine Groves. Silence. The other guard flickered their eyes between master and officer. Bah! Make these lowborn dance in flames, and the wheel, Pedaxis. They will reveal their secrets through pain of torture. Doubling down, the wanderer took a step forward and enunciated. I shall reveal nothing, then. At this, Pedaxis truly scrutinized the wanderer. Like a hawk making heads or tails of a shape darting between stacks of cut grass. Yakul murmured darkly. Even the woman of the wagon now peered out, staring at the wanderer. The decision between instinct or oath. Very well. I have made my choice. The sergeant sighed. Lead us to the fallen caravan. Make no quick movements. Any trickery and I'll have your bones to sew my men back together after I run you through, stern to stem. You have my word, Sergeant. Freedom felt a distant dream as the wanderer felt the burning eyes rest on his shoulders. Not that he'd never been imprisoned. The greater drag on his soul was not they'd been apprehended, but the delay from reaching Blue Tablet, an impediment he'd hoped to avoid. Yakul was dour than he. It wasn't just the withdrawals. The man was down mad. Hugging the corridor shown into the ochre rock, the former shepherd hissed. Why do you lie to them and doom us? I did not. There was no other caravan. The man's eyes glinted. Why did you lie? Watch, listen, and learn, fool. Knuckles whitened, and the large man turned a shade closer to Tomato. Stuff your conspiracies, warned the sergeant, appearing just behind them. My companion is without drink, the wanderer replied casually. He'll live. The road narrowed, and the crevasse widened on their left, loose earth where the hill had slid. The sentinels of the caravan held javelin aloft, scanning the steep bluff for signs of ambush. The two loopers, lashed to the wagon drawn by oxen, began to protest suddenly, honking and pawing the earth. Whatever is that rot? Stifling his nose, Cressida ogled. That utter foulness that lingers. Look closely. Figure that your sister caravan lies below. Wreckage appeared in the soapstone teeth, decorating the steam bed with a splinter forest. The stench was nauseous from afar. Stand watch. Don't leave the wagon and the lady scythe, commanded Pedaxis to his guardsmen. Ready your slings in case these idiots have friends. I want no man to fall prey to these traps. A wary beast, the sergeant. His age and rank had not come from luck then, but wisdom. The recovery party stumbled gracelessly where shade reigned, more scraping and hugging the sheer earth than climbing. Leading them deftly, the wanderer stopped often for the sergeant, a fist of his guard, Resido, and Yakul to catch up. Clay filled their fingernails and smeared their tunics. The aristocrats' rich garments were crusted. Clicking and hissing filled the dim crevasse. Scuttlers were abound with their shells and antennae, slinking sideways across the rock. Some had flesh stuck in their mandibles, blood staining their claws. Odors of varying decay awaited them like a foul mist. Eyes began to water, yet the riverbed was not the source. There, the wanderer indicated. The ruin of the wagon grew up close. Totally annihilated by the fall, it was a miracle the lacquered wood remained. Pottery shards lay everywhere, torn tapestries like corpses draped over toothy planks, and an assortment of heirlooms littered the reddened bed. Yet, no bodies. They fanned out and gave the wreckage a wide berth. Cressida shrieked. "The knave lies! I see no traps. Oh, but the stench! But where are the dead?" "Sir, drag marks and prints." No one seemed to know what it belonged to, other than it easily dwarfed any of theirs. For the moment everything was forgotten. The men were captured by the mystery, and their most base instinct, to know everything that walked on the earth, and, if they could eat it. "I see the treasure chests," a guard pointed. Greed overwhelmed the party. A curse, a thud, then came a shriek. Capturing the anarchy in the ranks, Yakul had the nobleman by the neck. A wide knife stolen from the guardsman he'd toppled. The wanderer grinned. That crazed, yellow-eyed desperation had returned to his companion. Sharp sugar had its talons firmly entrenched in his soul. Cressida spluttered under the bare arm of his kidnapper. "Unhand him." The sergeant held his spear low, voice cool. "Scum! Do it, now!" Yakul snickered and pulled the man closer instead. "Tell your friend," snarled the sergeant to the wanderer. "I'll spear you through if he doesn't." Encouraging, the wanderer did. "Don't be so rash, Yakul. Listen to the man." "Enough of your honey tongue." The hillman turned to the sergeant. "Slay the fool for all I care. I'm leaving this place. Follow me at your peril." And then the large man hauled the squealing hostage by the hair, backpedaling upstream where the drag marks cut into the earth. Ignoring the threat, the guards cautiously followed the sound of their master, taking great restraint not to paw the gold instead. "How many do you truly number? How many slingers await us? No pair of bandits could have accomplished this." The question came from the tip of the spear that firmly prodded the wanderer's back. "Just us two." "I am sick of your little games. I haven't spit you through only because you're useful as a shield. Now tell me everything, and perhaps you'll see this cycle through." "I'm not lying. You can tell, can't you? When I lie and when I don't. I make it obvious." But Axis faltered, then. "Why?" "That's the first intelligent question you've asked today." "Oh, good, a cave," one of the guards with a baby face commented blackly. "I love caves." "Shut it, Braxton," commented the sergeant. "I was hired to guard old Wrinkly's purse, man, not go play hero in this godforsaken pit." Wiping his reddened nostrils, another addict and guard snorted. "Scared, Braxton? Why don't you go first, Nose Crystal? Judging by your special level of ugly, it would be a family reunion for you. Look, Mother's little crawlers come home." Ghoulish hazes silenced the dispute. The cavernous slit in the canyon implied erosion, like festering wound by green stone and crimson earth. Outside the void of darkness, two crabs were engaged in a tug of war for a desiccated hand. The rot became overwhelming. All the guard but Neonices were dry heaving outside the gap, even Bedaxis. "Ladies' loins, that is foul." Neonices grinned. "Smells like that brothel I dragged you out of, eh, Brax?" There was no rebuttal, only vomiting. An echo of Cressida's ravings could be heard from within, but the guards swayed in their boots, even as they staved away nausea. This was far from repelling beggars in alleys or a skirmish with the highwaymen. The wanderers saw it. It tightened the corners of their eyes, dried their lips, and ran in sweat under their brass helms. Allowing his men to bolster up for the task, Bedaxis rounded to face the wanderer. "Just answer me this, then. What is that ornament? I know my master's never seen it. He's the greediest toad this side of the horizon sea. But you played along. Why? What piece of your plot does it play?" The wanderer did not answer. Rewarding the impudence, Pedax shoved him against the rock wall. Hard. Several pieces of stone tumbled. Gnashing his teeth, the sergeant let loose. "Answer me, dog! I'll not send my men to suicide!" "It is power," simply responded the wanderer, as composed as he could be for being crushed by the larger man. "He has no use for it, but it may have a use for him. Some kind of sorcery." "You could say that." "Sir," the narrow-faced guard mauled, "he's filth. Why bother trying to question him? Dionysius, have you ever met a thief who lets himself be captured, hand over all the goods he's filched, and then let his captor lead him around like a chained beast? Willingly?" Sullen. "No. Question isn't whether we trust him. It's whether we trust this liar's instincts to survive more than the greedy fingers of our idiot master." That got them blinking. None of us wish to die. I could have joined one of the Tartan companies marching towards Ayiban if I wanted to end my career with my guts, defeat swamp worms. Cressida was far from a gracious host, but he pays handsomely. The sergeant released him, eyeing the cavern. "I want to end my days in peace. You hear me, thief?" The wanderer nodded. A time and place to be uncooperative. Today was not that. "Well, I'm beginning to miss ordinary pickpockets." "I understand. As I said, I didn't intend any of this," the wanderer replied with the half-truth, offering a hand. Pedaxus roused his men into fighting shape. None of them looked up for the task. The grizzled sergeant didn't waste time with speech or tactics. "Follow the knave. Keep your eyes sharp. You, thief, you go first." Into the bleakness they went. The cavern went uphill, forcing them to crawl up a slope where all light failed. The drag marks made gouges in the soft earth. Somewhere beyond, the distant shrieking of Cressida. The stench cloyed at every fiber of their being, the fermenting of maggot flesh, and a plague of 1,000 ripe corpses. Every guard faltered and complained. It went beyond foul. The smell was unholy, odious, and relatable to only the most abominable pit of decay, unfit for the living. The cavern widened as it leveled. A depression hollowed out of the bowl. Suddenly, where pieces of rock or earth were now bones, hundreds of them, stuck which way or another, bizarre collections of hellish relics like the husks of crushed scuttlers, a pair of splintered antlers sticking out like spears, so on. Between them and their quarry it was dank and dark, too little for the eyes of man to see. That nasally quip, "We are being led into hell. Why would that trouble an imp like you?" growled back Dionysius. "I'm interring you both in the soil if you don't stop." Their vision became fuzzy, melting mud, and whispers of silhouettes. "Be reasonable. There are far deeper and more wicked places in this world than this pit," replied the wanderer. Then the cavern trembled. A quake not of earth, but of large something that prowled the tunnels. Its very gate made the pools of water shudder. A slow and monstrous 4-beat dirge from hell that drummed the dirt. When the sound had long ceased, the wanderer began to walk once more, hearing another close to him. He drowned in his thoughts, concerned more with the effects of the black relic on the aristocrat than what dreaded creature lay in the cavern. An experiment was occurring, and not any he'd had any role in. The wreckage of bones snatched him in his pondering. Untangling himself from the ribcage of what must have been a loper once, the wanderer grabbed something for support, the arm of the grizzled man, who jerked. "Apologies. If we are where I think we are, we must find the other tunnel. What? No way these carcasses came here by the narrow canyon. Lopers don't like heights. The master of this cave brought them down here, another way. How do we find it? Wind. How exactly are we going to find wind down here? The wanderer tapped his nostrils, realizing this was moot due to the darkness, added, I can smell the breezes ahead. Too sharp for a common criminal. The sergeant loosened his arm, then commanded, Shut your breathers and listen for a breeze, you gangly pigeons. Braxian, Neonices, you go right. But there was no answer. Hello? Jarius? Desiathes? Cyrado? Nothing. A commotion sounded ahead, wet thuds, a muffled wail of indiscernible origin. Idiots! When I told them to fan out, I did not mean... The sergeant drifted in frustration. Wait. Did you hear that? I did. Mud squelched skulls into the bosom of earth. Moisture slid from the toothy ceiling, and the dull horror of silence smothered all. Nothing penetrated the darkness. Then, intermingled with the ambience, came a striking, flints clashing upon stone, a flash of sparks. This time the wanderer pled to Pedaxus. No, tell them to cease. That's Jarius. A yellowed flame summoned several spear lengths away from the two, rendered brackish against the orange-green gloom. Shining behind it was the imbecilic face of a guard, grinning as if his act was Promethean. The torch waved once. The guard clustered around it and began to scan for their officer, who stood far from the range of the glow. Fools! The smoke! The smell will attract it! The wanderer hissed. A warning given too late. The den awoke. 4 beats drummed and began to rock the cavern. That horrible something drew near in haste. Regret reflected in the guards' widened eyes, mouths parting in horror as they turned to face the sound. It was almost pitiful. The urban security was too used to dealing with miscreants and burglaries, the soft children of walled realms, where beasts were kept in cages or confined to tapestry. Aiming their spears, shaking their sandals, they readied themselves. At the light's edge, it emerged, a monstrosity slicked in gore and filth. Its eyes shimmered yellow-green, a product of its adaptation to the subterranean world. Upon a colossal head that could fit an ox in his maw, a wall of fur like the gold grasses of prairie, tall as a loper, legs thick as columns, with the long-faced bathed red in the fresh pulp of corpses. Urgas, breathed the warrior. Unhinging its jaw, the colossal carnivore unleashed a bellow that conjured all the fears of primitive imagination, the very same that the wanderer had imitated in the camp of the raiders. In the ghastly stench of its roar was the very adversary to civilization, the undefeated lord of plains, that dared any man set foot on his land where he could sprint for cycles at the mere scent of blood, withstand a rain of bronze-tipped arrows without pain, and eat an entire tribe without sating his wagon-sized belly. Even sinking a bronze cyclade to its hilt would not pierce through its layers of fat and sinew. No tales had been sung of victory against Urgas. Go! Shook the wanderer, who took off in the opposite direction. He heard the sergeant follow, lamenting all the way. Behind him, the screams of the doomed men rang in the cavern as their limbs were shorn by scythe-like claws, bones crushed like sand, and bodies thrown into chunks across the cavern. Fleeing towards the inner depths of the cavern where sludge piled against stone walls, the wanderer breathed at last. Not far behind, the sergeant padded, vigor in his pace, reinforced by the dismemberment and devouring of his men. Their vision ruined still by the lingering spot where the torch burned their retinas. Pedaxis prayed, incoherent. "We're close." An unsteady laugh came from the unnerved man. "Cressida and your companion won't have escaped. This is our end. Seas condemn us all. We cannot escape such a terror." If the Wanderer had been immortal, he'd have long lost his will to explore, and agreed with the sergeant. Instead, he cheerily prodded the earthen walls until they bent and expanded into more tunnels, those that gave way to an unnatural material exposed by erosion, seamless, opaque glass. Yes, this way." Giddy, the Wanderer began to pick up his pace where the earth was bulbing and more glass became exposed. The floor dropped, and they landed on tilted flooring, a ramp that led upward. Glass spanned the entire ramp, an artificial tunnel reflecting the dim black-green light perfectly, vacant so 5 men could stand upon each other's shoulder to the ceiling. Yet, the light came below. "Mercy of the Lady Azure, where have you taken us?" "Sergeant Pedaxis, have you ever heard of the God-Walkers?" "The who?" "Before there were men, and before there were beasts, there was a race of creators who inhabited the plains of Basque, a race of sorcerer spirits. They endured a tide of apocalypses that ravaged the world and unseated the gods from their moon thrones. When they fell, they were but venturesome phantoms left to roam the endless seas of earth and stone. From their fingertips radiated a power that trickled down from Basque himself to reshape the world." Echoing his voice in distilled, watery tones, the story flew down the tunnel where they wandered. Closer to the end, the light turned the glass golden and highlighted its structural shape. Prismatic, each edge sharp and fashioned by tooling that escaped even the most masterful of men. Only the spectral sorcerers had possessed the foundries to raise such constructs from the immaterial. "Your civilization stands on the bones of empires, and even those are but shallow graves upon what lies underneath, Sergeant. Time itself has abandoned the existence of the God-Walkers. Care to explain what all this is for?" Pedaxis touched the glass and shuddered. No need to ask. It was ice to the touch. The Wanderer knew. "You can ask them yourself." "These God-Walkers still live?" "Never died. The rivers to reincarnation were closed to them long before I was the glint in my master's eye," replied the Wanderer, noting the other man's stare. "But they went mad. Their creations, too, irradiating the lands. Some blended into the tainted world and continued into infinitum, seeking purpose after their masters had fallen." "Why?" Light splashed their faces. A presence of another haunted the dead end, thick in the air as the ever-present rot. Carcasses in their decaying glory piled high, smearing the glass enclosure. At the apse of the desecrated chamber lay a mechanism of crystalline textile that sprouted core-like from the earthen wall. A side cut of a gigantic column with dull teeth hewn into its rim, a construct banished by memory. But standing in the epicenter of the den was Cressida, looming over the unconscious form of his captor, holding aloft a great bone. The aristocrat was stained in such filth he was nigh unrecognizable. Clasped over his neck like a gorget, the dark amulet had molded to fit his gangly shape. The Wanderer knew why the great Yakul was unconscious. It wasn't the bone. "Lord!" called Pedaxus. The man did not respond as he should have. A wordless guttural moan escaped the aristocrat's lips. "He's being throttled," commented the wanderer, transfixed. "Bascourt you to a crisp, man! Stop speaking in riddles!" Supposing the guard could not control his restlessness, the wanderer would have gladly watched him fall into the same sorcerous trap. The very portrait of a man torn between decision. Stone-headedness relented to cool detachment. Pedaxus stood firm. They did not need to wait long. Cressido's hackles rose, jerking in animated motion. Oscillating light bloomed about the man, encircling his figure as if were a mortal torch. He twisted and gave a glimpse of the cartouche. At the creases of the navel, the three faces split like a flower, each petal of metal curled outward to reveal divine radiance. Wondrous heat began to ripple in the room, air distorted by the effect. It yearned to be wielded. An illusory serpent began to corkscrew from the living gem within the dark metal. The aspect of a deity who could not be mistaken as any mere illusion swam out from the amulet like it was a lotus. The chamber reacted to this power. Slowly the great mechanism began to jerk and wrest itself free of the cobweb and earth, gyrating back and forth. Drunk on power, the tunnel yielded and began to flute harmoniously with the waterfall's grace. A moment passed of the absolute awe. The artifact gave life to the forgotten room. Serpentine tendrils began to imitate the first, and soon 100 such streams stretched out to bleed into the walls of glass. But the cost was too great to the holder. Cressido shrieked as his skin began to liquefy. All at once, skin and flesh was reduced to slag, skeletal frame poking free of the hot meat. There was a hideous sound of implosion as the cartouche sought divine blood of its holder. There was none, of course. Danger reared its ugly head. A great roar shook the two observers free of the nightmare and planted them in another. Approaching down the ramp and filling the tunnel was the master of the den, drenched in the blood of man, plastered with pieces of skin and hair. Urgaz had come to seal their doom. Desperation seized the wanderer by the throat. They were cornered by chaos. Nothing had proceeded even in the slightest of his imaginations or wishes. A day racked by sinister omens and disaster. Hope was pointless, so he bargained with luck, his oldest friend. He shoved the sergeant off his feet, surprisingly easy given the man's musculature, into the muck, then without mockery dove himself head first into the pile of grisly filth. The last thing he saw was the colossal monster charging straight for the ignoble aristocrat, and an explosion rain of fur and flesh. A faint breeze stirred the silk sheets. Arid air of the late season did not suit the Lady Scythe, virgin bride of the miserly Cressido, who impatiently lounged. Growing bored of lambasting the guards with colorful insult to which they could do nothing but grind their teeth at, she resorted to counting the shrubs on the rolling prairie hills. Outside her palace, she was but a useless decoration, a pretty thing to bounce around in a crate until her husband stopped counting his treasure to remark on her dress or demand her a response to some hypothetical scenario involving one of his trades. Only cycles into their travels had she grown as dry as the brush that dominated the sea of clay. At least in her previous life as a penitent waif scrubbing the feet of the holies, it had not been so dull. Outside, Aye, a shadow on the hill. Enthusiastic, Scythe peered. Spat out of the crevasse, at long last were 3 figures. Haggardly they crawled towards the road. Her face creased at the sight of Cressido, though a smirk touched her lips. The noble's aqua robes were but torn ribbons draping his feeble frame. They were all soaked wet. Oh, but how she loved to see him so cartoonishly weak, dragging his slippered feet like a child. The gratifying sight was worth the future temper he'd unleash upon her. "We're back, miss us?" Braxian stumbled in first, tossing his helm to the dirt. "Sir," Ichthamos addressed, "are you all that's left?" Pedaxus ordered, "Take the leash off this one, and gag him." The red-eyed Yakul gnashed and squirmed. "May the earth maggots fill your body and drain your—" Silenced, the man was promptly lashed to the wagon and kicked for good measure. It took 4 men to restrain him. "Can I kick in his teeth, Sergeant?" Pedaxus shook his head. "Go rest, Dionysus." "What of the other knave?" one of them asked, nursing a bruise. It was Cressido who answered, splashing himself with a washbowl. In his other hand was the black 3-faced artifice. "Dead. By the lady's mercy. That hellish place devoured him, as the omen predicted. We won't speak of that flea-ridden dog again." "And what of Sarthakisses and his fortune?" Scythe called down to him without any warmth or fondness. For all her beauty she showed only ice. Why would these ilk deserve more? "Ours now, my beloved. He and his party have gone on now to the ships of Our Lady that ply the endless seas," Cressido replied, uncharacteristically calm. They locked eyes. His soft merchant's face was unchanged, yet a shift in countenance. Had her miser of a husband discovered bravery in the canyon? By the appearance of the guard, it had been some tribulation. No, there was more. Scythe reclined on the silk bedding and pondered. "I hope Sarthakisses doesn't mind that we, guard his mortal wealth while he's on the forever boat," added Braxian. The guards set about retrieving the cargo from the canyon. By afternoon they had ferried it up, sorting what could be salvaged. The sergeant was a stickler, ordering more than half the loot to be tossed down to the soapstone. A cumbersome chest wrought of green iron, casks of invaluable wines, and half a library of scrolls remained. Enough for a king still. "What should be done of them, lord?" Pedaxus addressed his master curtly and without venerations. I did not consider the riches would pile so high. The lady blesses us. Lady Scythe, my bride, please join me out here." Face shining under her ornamentation, she was testy and far too scrutinous for his liking. She sniffed. "Your former demand was that my flesh was to be unsoiled and seemly to you, lord. Did you not already tell me the earth would mar my purity?" Yes, I did say as much." Cressido had now dressed into a spectacle, 100-folded robes, fashions of southern royalty, secured by emerald-studded sashes. A cool beauty, Scythe. Her dark coils were picked up by the wind, and she strode out of the caravan to meet Cressido, barefoot. She truly was a divine specimen. It took all the will of the guard to avert their eyes. Her husband grinned. "Aren't you going to chide me?" "Whatever for, wife? I wish to see you in your fullness." The nobleman shuddered. "The terror of the cave made me want for nothing more but to feel your pure presence again." delicate brows elevated. "Have you decided I'm worth your attention?" The man said nothing. Unable to admit the conflict in his tone, he brushed her hair aside and smiled. "Neglecting you has been a great mistake." Scythe thawed and grabbed his hand. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more intimate setting. I don't want to put ideas in your guards' heads." Inexplicably, Cressida dropped her grip. "Sergeant Pedaxis," an uncomfortable grunt from the man who pretended to have been deaf the last few moments. Do we have enough space to store our newly acquired cargo?" "I was just about to pester you about that, Lord." "What about my cabin?" Scythe snorted softly. "And what should we do? Ride atop the wagon?" Her husband and lord nodded to the guards. "Do it." Prying open the doors to the wagon, the wealth of Sarthakeses miraculously squeezed into the lavish and custom interior of the wagon. Only the fore-compartment remained half empty. "Lord!" she hissed, all of her warmth replaced with sardonic frost. "You would have me walk to our journey to Nine Groves? I would perish." "Don't be foolish. We have a perfectly suitable saddle for you to ride on. Guard, will you please assist my beloved onto yonder loper?" Whistling and chortling like little demons, they obliged him. His woman turned absolutely feral. "You shame me. You will be exiled for debasing me. Nine Groves won't receive you." "They would not." The noble's voice was sharp and certain. "For Nine Groves is not our destination, my beloved." "What?" Whipping the oxen and switching the lopers, the caravan was not driven westwards as it had been. For no explicable reason, it was turned around. If the carrion of sky who trailed them possessed any logic, they'd be dumbfounded to watch the wagon depart, hit the grasslands, then flip back to return to her origin. The vultures, of course, did no such thing. Only the members of the caravan speculated as to why their master ordered such an illogical, unexpected, and uncharacteristic move to return to the besieged blue tablet.